get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principles.
From small town to global pulpit, what if one single choice could rewrite decades of your life and define not just your faith, but your fortune? At dawn on December 6, 1936, in the quiet plains of Lubbock, Texas, a boy named Kenneth Max Copeland entered the world. Back then, no one could have predicted that this boy would become one of the most influential and controversial preachers the world has ever seen. He grew up near an Air Force base. The roar of planes taking off and landing above his childhood home wasn't just noise. It became a dream. He imagined soaring through the skies, free. That dream clung to him, even as his life began in a very different direction. By his late teens, he turned to music. He had a rich voice. He performed songs in clubs and eventually signed with a record label. In 1957, he scored a hit, a single that soared into America's top 40 charts. That success might have been enough for many. For him, it was only the beginning of a larger journey. Then came what he described as his moment of awakening, a spiritual turning point that lifted his eyes off the microphone and aimed them at faith. He walked away from music. He walked away from worldly applause, and he began a journey toward ministry. But his old dreams didn't vanish. The fascination with flight stayed and would become part of a strategy that few could have anticipated. A shift in direction and a new calling. In the late 1960s, Kenneth enrolled at a Christian university, where he met mentors who opened his eyes to something bigger than fame or charts. He was no longer content performing songs. He wanted to preach, to lead, to build a movement. With vision and conviction, he co-founded a ministry. What started modestly would eventually spiral into a global organization. The ministry base, media broadcasts, worldwide outreach. This wasn't an overnight success. There were early struggles, doubts, but also a core belief that faith could transform lives, that spiritual devotion deserved boldness, and that preaching wasn't a hobby. It was a calling. Yet Kenneth didn't leave behind his fascination with the skies. Some saw it as conflicting with the humble preacher image. For him, it was a tool, a way to reach more people fast, building the ministry on earth and in the sky. Over the decades, his ministry expanded beyond a single church. Broadcasts, radio, print, global outreach. The platform grew. They didn't just preach sermons. They built a network. On a sprawling 33-acre site in Texas, once a Marine Corps air base, stood the headquarters. It included studios for broadcasting, admin buildings, residences, and a personal airport. Why an airport? Kenneth believed that conventional travel couldn't keep up with the pace of his mission.
Just saying, not the people. The main reason is because of the need. If I flew commercial, I'd have to stop 65% of what I'm doing. That's really the main.
Isn't it true that you want to fly commercial so that you can fly in luxury? How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business, but...
Isn't it the business of your donors?
Listen, I paid. You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
Certainly. Well, if you'd like to come out here, I'd like to give you a chance to catch your breath and have a conversation. We don't want to catch you off guard.
I love Inside Edition. You got to get this now. Hey, you listening to me? My wife thinks Inside Edition is, oh yeah. Now, thank you, Lord. Help me. Let me pray this thing.
Well, let me just ask you a really simple question. A lot of people think it's unbecoming for a preacher to live a life of luxury and to fly around in private jets. What's your response to that?
Very simple. It takes a lot of money to do what we do. We have brought over 100, let's see, the latest figures just came out, 122 million people to the Lord Jesus Christ. Let me give you another example. Last May, I was scheduled for Lagos, Nigeria. That's a long ways. I had a week off, and I was scheduled for Peru. And I prayed about it, and I thought, I'm not missing that dedication in Jerusalem. Without the airplane that we have, that I bought from Tyler Perry, and I didn't pay anywhere. Tyler's one of the greatest guys. He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
Well, my question then, okay, all right, but I want to get to the demons, because people are very concerned about that comment.
Give me a chance here, Inside Edition. Okay. I love your eyes. And here's what happened. We flew in 21 days, 70 hours, 40,000 miles, touched 5 continents, and preached face to face personally with 125,000 people.
Do you ever use your private jets to go visit your vacation homes, for example?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Again, getting back to the comment, you said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers.
Can you explain what you meant by that term?
Type, I'm here till the end in the comments. I want to see who's locked in. Also, hit like if you believe stories of transformation are worth hearing. Why this story matters for you. This isn't just a biography. It's a mirror. Because many of us start somewhere small. A quiet town, modest means, simple dreams. Maybe we sing. Maybe we work. Maybe we hope. Maybe we face rejection. Maybe we fall. But what if, like Kenneth, you could channel the noise, the doubt, the early failures into something bigger? What if the same faith that lets you survive could carry you to success? What if your setbacks were setups for something greater? That's the tension at the heart of this story. Faith disguised as risk, ambition balanced on conviction, and a life built not just on belief, but on bold action. Because sometimes the difference between a life lived and a life launched is a single decision to commit. And yet, the question remains, when faith becomes fortune, does destiny become dangerous? Chapter 2. The Pattern Behind the Rise. Before you judge a man's success, you must first understand the system that built it. And the system Kenneth Copeland uncovered is the same one that can transform your life today. The expansion begins. By the early 1970s, Kenneth Copeland was no longer just a preacher. He was crafting a framework, a model he believed anyone could use to reshape their life from the inside out. He studied faith like an engineer studies physics. He analyzed belief like a scientist analyzes matter. He treated spiritual laws like universal principles, formulas, not mysteries. And that mindset would become the backbone of his life's mission. But first, he had to test it. Money was scarce. Resources were limited. His voice was known among many believers, but his ministry lacked scale. What he needed wasn't luck. It was alignment, consistency, a pattern that would repeat itself again and again and again until it lifted his ministry from grassroots sermons to global influence. You know how everyone today talks about manifestation, positive thinking, abundant mindset. Kenneth was applying those ideas decades earlier, not as theories, but as lifestyle disciplines. And people didn't just notice, they followed. The 3 laws that built his early ministry. In interviews and sermons from that era, Kenneth described 3 principles he embedded into everything he did. Whether you believe them or not, these became the foundation of his influence. 1. The law of expectation. The idea that you don't receive what you wish for. You receive what you prepare for. He expected growth. He expected opportunity. He expected provision, and expectation changed his posture. Instead of, should I build a ministry? It became, how large should it be? Instead of, can I afford this outreach? It became, what structure do I need to support it? Expectation shaped decisions before the results appeared. That is the psychology of momentum. 2. The law of seed and harvest. This wasn't just a biblical idea. He applied it as a leadership strategy. Give time, gain influence. Give value, gain loyalty. Give effort, gain mastery. Give resources, gain expansion. In business terms, inputs determine outputs. But the twist, he believed the output is always multiplied. People resonated with this principle not because it was theological, but because it felt practical, measurable, actionable. 3. The law of consistency. While many preachers waited for inspiration, Kenneth structured his days like a CEO on daily study, daily outreach, daily discipline, no off seasons, no waiting for a sign, no someday. This consistency built credibility. Credibility built audience. Audience built a movement. That's the pattern. These 3 laws shaped every decision he made, and they became the invisible engine behind the ministry's expansion. Before we continue, answer this. Which law do you think matters most? Expectation, seed and harvest, or consistency? Type your answer below. A ministry turning into a machine. By mid-1970s, something unusual was happening. Most ministries grew in slow waves. Kenneth's ministry grew like a company, in systems, in layers, in departments. He wasn't building a church. He was building an operation. Satellite offices, mail outreach, radio broadcasts, national events, training centers. This was long before the internet, long before social media, long before online sermons existed. Yet, his message was everywhere. Why? Because he applied a principle uncommon in ministry at the time. Use every platform available, aggressively. He was publishing books. He was recording tapes. He was mailing monthly teachings. He was speaking at conventions across the country. Followers didn't just see him as a preacher. They saw him as a guide, someone with answers. And the pattern was simple. Tell a relatable story. Present a spiritual law behind it. Show an everyday way to apply it. Tell the audience to expect change. This formula created retention before retention was even a word in media strategy. Documentary lens, the psychology behind his influence. Let's step back for a moment. Why did Copeland's message spread so widely? It wasn't only theology. It wasn't only charisma. It wasn't only ministry structure. It was psychology. He added certainty to uncertainty. Most people live in doubt. Am I enough? Will things ever work out? Is success possible for me? Kenneth spoke in absolutes. Not maybe, not possibly. But this is the spiritual law. Follow it, and you will see results. People gravitate toward voices of certainty in times of confusion. It feels like clarity. It feels like direction. He gave people a sense of control. Many believers grew up thinking life is predetermined, that you wait for blessings. Kenneth flipped that idea. You initiate, you activate, you create. That shift gave people agency, and people become loyal to any message that empowers them. He tapped into a universal desire, improvement. Every movement in history, every philosophy, every coaching model, every self-help book, they all follow the same motivation. People want better lives. Kenneth offered a blueprint: simple, structured, hopeful, actionable. Whether someone believed every teaching or not, the emotional appeal was undeniable. If you've ever tried improving your life, financially, mentally, spiritually, hit like right now. It pushes this story to more people who might need it. The people around him start to change. During this period, testimonies began rising. People claiming breakthroughs, debts paid off, businesses started, health restored, families rebuilt. Were all these outcomes direct results of Kenneth's teachings? Some say yes, some say no. Some say both faith and action played the role. But the truth is this: when people believe change is possible, their behavior changes, and behavior drives results. That's psychology. That's neuroscience. That's human nature. Copeland tapped into that deeply, consistently, intentionally, and as more people shared their transformations, his audience expanded. Because nothing grows influence faster than testimonials. But patterns attract attention and scrutiny. As his ministry grew, so did the questions. Why is this preacher becoming wealthy? How can he justify growth while preaching humility? Is this genuine faith or strategic marketing? Critics watched the expansion and raised eyebrows. Supporters saw the expansion and praised God. Two narratives, one reality. The ministry was scaling faster than anyone expected. And scaling comes with a price, not financially, reputationally. Because the line between admiration and suspicion is razor thin when success becomes visible. The first signs of controversy. He was traveling more, often by private aircraft. He was preaching to larger crowds. He was acquiring property. He was building infrastructure. To his followers, this was a ministry leveling up for global impact. To others, it looked like excess. But Kenneth didn't slow down. He didn't soften his message. He didn't retreat. He doubled down. Because he believed that scaling the ministry wasn't indulgence. It was responsibility. If you're reaching millions, you need systems. If you're broadcasting globally, you need equipment. If you're traveling constantly, you need efficiency. That was his mindset. But critics rarely attack mindset. They attack outcomes. And that tension would follow him for decades. When success rises, shadows appear. Not because success is wrong, but because it is visible. If that hits you, drop truth in the comments. The pattern behind the pattern. This is the part most people miss. Kenneth Copeland was not only teaching a formula, he was living it. And that consistency is what built momentum. It wasn't a one-time burst of faith. It was a continuous cycle. Vision, action, faith, adjustment, expansion. Vision leads to action. Action creates progress. Progress demands faith. Faith reveals mistakes. Mistakes force adjustments. Adjustments fuel expansion. Expansion creates bigger vision. That loop can build anything: a ministry, a business, a life. Copeland's rise was simply one example. Your life could be another. Cliffhanger. The connection. No one saw coming. As the ministry grew, Kenneth's approach began attracting not just followers, but leaders, entrepreneurs, influencers, business owners. People wanting to know one thing: is there a link between faith and financial success? And as the world would soon learn, Kenneth had an answer. A bold one, a controversial one, a life-changing one. In the next chapter, we explore the moment the ministry shifted from spiritual leadership to a global economic force. Chapter 3, The Architect of Faith, How Kenneth Copeland Engineered a Global Ministry. What separates a small-time preacher from a global religious force? And why did Kenneth Copeland succeed where others collapsed under pressure? Before Copeland became a household name, before the jets, the broadcasts, and the multi-million-member partner base, he had something most ministries never bother to build: architecture. Not buildings, systems, structures, blueprints for influence. This chapter explores how Kenneth Copeland engineered his operation with the precision of a business strategist, the resolve of a CEO, and the conviction of a man certain he had a mandate from God. The moment he realized sermons alone weren't enough. For many preachers, a good message is the finish line. For Kenneth Copeland, it was the starting point. By the early 1970s, Copeland recognized that standing behind a pulpit on Sunday mornings, no matter how powerful the sermon, was never going to reach the millions he believed were spiritually starving for the principles of faith. He saw the limitations of traditional ministry models. A church building confined your reach. Municipal schedules restricted your movement. A congregation capped your influence at however many people could fit inside four walls. Copeland believed faith should not be localized, so he began designing a ministry built on distribution, not attendance. It was a revolutionary mindset in a decade when most churches were still passing out paper bulletins and relying on word of mouth. But Copeland wasn't thinking in terms of church growth. He was thinking in terms of message replication. He needed a system that could multiply the word faster than any single preacher could preach it. And that meant architecture. The first real infrastructure, the Faith Factory. The earliest version of Kenneth Copeland Ministries, KCM, wasn't glamorous. No massive campus, no nationwide events, no broadcast towers. It consisted of a small rented office, a folding table, a typewriter, a handful of volunteers, boxes of cassette tapes, and a man convinced he had a global mandate. But even in its infancy, Copeland treated the ministry like a production facility, not a preaching hobby. Every letter that went out, every tape duplicated, and every meeting scheduled had purpose behind it. He often referred to the ministry in those early days as a faith factory, a place where biblical teaching was refined, polished, and shipped out as a product. This is where Copeland separated himself from thousands of preachers who never become national voices. He thought in systems, processes, and repeatable frameworks. He wasn't building a church. He was building a distribution machine. The asshole principle. Why every organization must confront their internal bottlenecks before they destroy growth. This section uses the word you requested strictly as a conceptual hook, not directed toward any real person. As KCM expanded, Copeland encountered a problem every growing ministry eventually faces: bottlenecks. People who resisted change. People who wanted to keep things small for comfort's sake. People who questioned why everything had to be done with excellence and urgency. Copeland referred to these personalities privately, not as enemies, but as faith blockers, individuals who accidentally, or sometimes intentionally, slow the momentum of a God-given assignment. In business terms, These individuals are often called assholes, not for being immoral or malicious, but because their resistance, fear, or negativity becomes a drag on structural momentum. Copeland learned early that if your mission is large, you cannot afford internal energy drainers. Great architecture requires alignment, not sabotage. So he reorganized continuously. He reassigned. He retrained. He replaced when necessary. The emerging ministry was not built by nice-to-have talent, but by individuals who shared one obsession: take the message to the world, fast, accurately, and without compromise. This intolerance for internal drag became a defining characteristic of KCM. It also became one of Copeland's most criticized and most effective leadership traits. How organization turned into empire. By the mid-1970s, partners were increasing, events were filling auditoriums, and the small office began choking under the pressure of correspondence, product requests, and logistical needs. Most ministries would have hired a secretary and hoped for the best. Copeland built departments. He began structuring the ministry like a corporation, assigning roles and responsibilities with clarity and measurable expectations. Key divisions that emerged included partner relations, the nerve center for communication, follow-up, and impact reporting. Tape production and distribution. Copeland saw audio media as the backbone of global teaching. Broadcast development. Long before Christian TV exploded, he was preparing for airtime. Publishing, newsletters, books, teaching manuals, and print distribution. Administration and operations, logistical support, event coordination, staffing systems. This was not typical for ministries of the era. Most operated with loose, volunteer-driven chaos. Copeland built a machine capable of scaling, a machine that decades later would allow his ministry to grow into a multi-continent operation with millions of partners. Why did Copeland move into television years before other ministries even thought about it? And how did that single decision multiply his influence beyond measurement? The media gamble that changed everything. In 1979, when Christian broadcasts were still relatively rare and expensive, Kenneth Copeland made a decision that seemed reckless. He committed to television as the ministry's next frontier. This was long before believers spent hours watching Christian networks, long before digital streaming, long before megachurch media brands. He believed God told him, this message must be taught daily. To Copeland, that meant airtime, daily airtime. This required money, studio space, and broadcast infrastructure the ministry did not yet have. But he moved anyway. Why? Because he understood what very few preachers of his time understood. Attention is the currency of influence, and media is the engine that prints that currency. When the Believer's Voice of Victory broadcast launched, it did not simply communicate sermons, it offered continuity, daily contact, daily teaching, daily reinforcement of the faith principles he believed were essential to spiritual victory. Television transformed Copeland from a traveling evangelist into a daily presence in the lives of millions. It also cemented his brand. The internal culture, excellence as a spiritual principle. Copeland demanded excellence, not as a business rule, but as a spiritual conviction. He believed sloppiness misrepresented God. He believed slow execution hindered faith. He believed disorganization obstructed destiny. So he built a culture defined by clean, structured processes, immediate follow-up, high production values, professional administration, fast-paced execution. Quality control at every layer. Staff were trained to see their work as ministry, not clerical duty. In Copeland's view, a poorly printed newsletter was just as damaging to the gospel as a poorly preached sermon. This emphasis on excellence became the backbone of KCM's identity. How did all this structure, discipline, and media strategy transform one man's calling into a global movement with decades of longevity? The global platform begins to take shape. By the early 1980s, the architecture Copeland spent a decade constructing was operational. Audio teaching was being shipped worldwide. Television broadcasts were in syndication. Partner income was funding expansion. Events were filling arenas. Publishing arms were producing large volumes of material. And the internal culture was aligned for long-term growth. The ministry was no longer dependent on Kenneth Copeland's physical presence or travel schedule. He had created a replicating engine, one capable of transmitting faith teaching across continents without pause. This architecture is what ultimately transformed Copeland from a preacher into a movement builder. He had accomplished what few ministers in history had done. He engineered a system where his message could outlive his schedule, his geography, and eventually, even his lifetime. Chapter 4: The Cost of Greatness, Power, Criticism, and the Rise of a Religious Empire. Every great movement eventually hits a wall. For Kenneth Copeland, that wall wasn't money, ambition, or even religious resistance. It was public perception. And what happened next revealed a truth every entrepreneur, leader, or visionary eventually faces. The world applauds success until it threatens their comfort. The moment abundance became controversy. By the late 1980s, Kenneth Copeland had transformed from a traveling minister into a global religious figure with a ministry that spanned broadcasting, publishing, events, and international outreach. His teachings on faith, prosperity, and biblical authority resonated deeply with millions. But the larger the ministry grew, the more attention it attracted, positive and negative. And nothing drew more public scrutiny than wealth. Copeland preached that faith produces results, and that those results can manifest spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and yes, financially. To his followers, this was empowering, a liberating idea, a philosophical jailbreak from generations of religious scarcity. To critics, it was dangerous, irresponsible, manipulative. The exact same message had become a dual-edged sword. This was the beginning of the era where one question would follow Copeland for decades. Can faith and finances coexist without suspicion? Before the jets, before the heated interviews, before the viral clips, one decision changed everything. A decision that convinced some he was walking in divine favor, and convinced others he had crossed a line. The first plane, a tool or a target. Long before Copeland became internet famous for owning multiple aircraft, he made a purchase that would change the trajectory of his ministry. His first airplane. Here's the context people forget. Copeland was traveling constantly. 4, 5, even 6 cities in a single week. Medical emergencies, funerals, crisis calls, people in need of ministry all over the country. Commercial travel could not keep up with the pace. He purchased the plane for ministry logistics, not personal luxury. It wasn't a jet. It wasn't opulent. It wasn't a symbol. It was a tool. But optics are a powerful force. Even though many pastors and evangelists of the time owned aircraft, some far nicer than Copeland's, he became the face of the controversy. Why? Because by this point, he represented an entire movement. The idea that God's favor could produce tangible, measurable results in a believer's life. Once again, the message that built him now painted a target on his back. The media lens, the double-edged spotlight. By the early 1990s, television had made Copeland one of the most visible ministers in the world. With visibility came vulnerability. News outlets searched for inconsistencies. Investigators hunted for financial irregularities. Critics scoured sermons for statements they could weaponize. Every successful figure knows this moment, the moment the world stops watching to learn and starts watching to attack. But here is what most people don't realize. KCM was unusually structured, unusually documented, and unusually prepared for scrutiny. Remember Chapter 3? The infrastructure, the departments, the systems. That architecture didn't just support growth, it protected them during these seasons. When questions came, Copeland had audited financial records, departmental accountability, and a structured, trackable flow of operations. But that didn't stop critics. Because critics don't need accuracy, they need a headline. There is one moment, one tense, camera-in-the-face confrontation that would define Copeland's public image for an entire generation. But what led to it? And why did the internet twist its meaning into something else entirely? The viral moment before virality existed. A media crew confronted him about ministry spending, particularly travel and aircraft usage. It was a tense exchange. Copeland attempted to explain the logistics of ministry aviation, the inefficiency of commercial schedules, and the practical reasoning behind private travel. But nuance doesn't trend. Context doesn't sell. The clip was edited down to a few seconds, a few emotional lines, a few facial expressions, enough to paint a caricature, not a person. It exploded. Years later, when the internet became the culture's central nervous system, the clip resurfaced and spread like wildfire. And just like that, Kenneth Copeland became a meme, a punchline, a symbol of religious excess, at least to people who never attended his meetings, never listened to his teachings, never read his books, and never examined the ministry's work. This moment revealed a truth every leader eventually learns. People don't judge your whole life. They judge a snapshot they don't understand. The controversy tension, message versus optics. Why did Copeland become such a lightning rod? Because his core message, faith as a catalyst for abundance, directly challenged deeply rooted cultural beliefs about humility, wealth, and spirituality. To millions of believers, it was freedom. To critics, it was arrogance. To the media, it was opportunity. And in the modern world, opportunity means leverage. Here is the psychological reality. If you preach poverty, nobody questions your motives. If you preach prosperity, everyone questions your integrity. This tension would shape Copeland's public image for decades. But here's what the world rarely talks about. Behind the headlines, behind the money debates, behind the celebrity image, there was a man who believed the mission required boldness, speed, and scale. And that scale required infrastructure. The mega campus, function or flex. By the late 1990s, KCM expanded onto its now famous property near Fort Worth, Texas. A sprawling campus, a central ministry headquarters, a church, a studio, a distribution center, an airfield. Critics saw extravagance. Supporters saw effectiveness. But what does the truth say? The campus was not a mansion, a theme park, or a vanity project. It was a logistical engine. Everything KCM produced, broadcasts, magazines, books, relief shipments, partner letters, global outreach, flowed through the facility. This is where Copeland's leadership philosophy emerges most clearly. He didn't build big because he wanted big. He built big because the mission required big. The teaching had global demand. The infrastructure had to match the calling. This is the part viewers need to understand. Kenneth Copeland never thought in terms of church size. He thought in terms of reach, replication, and capacity. When vision grows, infrastructure must expand, or the message collapses under its own weight. The internal battle, the calling versus the noise behind the scenes, Copeland faced a battle more challenging than critics, media, or public commentary. Expectations. People forget that building a movement doesn't just demand execution, it demands emotional resilience. The criticism stung, the headlines hurt, the misunderstandings weighed heavy. But every visionary eventually reaches a point where they must decide. Do I fold to satisfy public opinion, or do I endure to fulfill purpose? Copeland chose endurance, not because he enjoyed controversy, not because he wanted fame, but because he believed the message he carried was worth absorbing backlash for. There is a principle here every ambitious viewer can internalize. Greatness requires a stomach strong enough to digest misunderstanding. If you are doing anything big, people will talk. If nobody talks, you're not doing anything big enough. If you're still watching, comment. I won't shrink for critics. It tells the algorithm you're engaged, and it tells your future self you're ready for purpose. The core message that refused to die. Despite every headline, every investigative report, every viral clip, every internet joke, Copeland's core message never changed. Faith, spoken words, authority, spiritual law, prosperity as a tool, not an idol. God's desire for believers to live with purpose, clarity, and abundance. Millions rejected it. Millions embraced it. But what mattered most was this: the message survived. The mission expanded. The audience grew. And this leads to the closing moment of Chapter 4. The inevitable question: how far can a message go if its leader refuses to back down? By the early 2000s, Kenneth Copeland had endured everything a public figure can face: criticism, controversy, misrepresentation, media pressure, public scrutiny, cultural backlash. And yet, he was still standing, still broadcasting, still preaching, still growing, still expanding his reach, still doubling down on the message that built him. What happens when a message grows so large that it begins influencing not just churches, but nations, politics, and global culture? Because that's the next phase, and that phase changed everything. Chapter 5: The Great Influence. Explosion, power, politics, and the globalization of a message. When does a message stop being a message and start becoming a movement? For Kenneth Copeland, that shift began when his teaching reached not just believers, but leaders, institutions, and decision-makers who shaped national direction. The era of unexpected influence. By the early 2000s, Kenneth Copeland was no longer simply a teacher of biblical faith principles. He was a brand, a broadcasting giant, a spiritual advisor, a movement anchor, a figure with enough reach to influence millions across continents. His conferences attracted pastors, business people, entrepreneurs, politicians, entertainers, and entire church networks seeking clarity on faith, authority, prosperity, and leadership principles. But what changed everything wasn't the number of people attending. It was who was attending. Copeland's message began to resonate with individuals who held influence, not just in churches, but in government, business, media, and even international policy spaces. Not because he sought political power, not because he campaigned, not because he lobbied, but because influence follows visibility, certainty, and consistency. And for 4 decades, Copeland had been all three. This quiet shift marked the beginning of a new phase for KCM, the global influence era. Most people assume Copeland pursued power, but the truth is more complex and more psychologically fascinating. Leaders often become influential simply because their followers rise into influential positions. The multiplier effect of disciples. As Copeland's teachings spread globally, particularly through television and later streaming, thousands of pastors adopted his faith principles. Hundreds of those pastors built large churches. Many of those churches developed significant social influence, and some of those leaders eventually stepped into advisory roles with governors, mayors, or national policymakers. This created a multiplier effect. Copeland didn't need to step into political spaces. His spiritual children did. His ideas traveled through people who led megachurches, managed community programs, worked with political candidates, influenced voter bases, shaped local and national conversations. Whether one agrees with his message or not, the reach was undeniable. This is how movements outlive their founders. The psychological mechanism is simple. If a philosophy empowers individuals on a personal level, those individuals naturally carry its principles into their public responsibilities. This was the unseen expansion of Copeland's influence, organic, decentralized, and driven by belief rather than strategy. When personal conviction meets public power. Around this time, Kenneth Copeland's ministry began intersecting with public conversations, not by political intent, but by cultural gravity. His teachings on speaking faith, rejecting fear, spiritual authority, overcoming adversity, walking in abundance, taking responsibility for personal destiny, became frameworks that leaders in other fields applied to: economics, crisis management, leadership training, community rebuilding, and even personal development programs. This connection between spiritual belief and public application created a narrative that fascinated supporters and alarmed critics. Supporters said, "He empowers leaders to lead with conviction." Critics said, "He is influencing areas outside religion." But the deeper truth is this: any message strong enough to change an individual will inevitably influence the environment that individual leads. Copeland never needed political plans. Influence was a byproduct of personal transformation, multiplied through people. The declaration that set the internet on fire. During a national broadcast, Copeland prayed publicly for the nation's direction, stability, and spiritual clarity. It was not unusual for him. He had prayed for presidents since the 1970s. He had prayed for national crises, economic turbulence, and global issues for decades. But this time, the cultural landscape had changed. The internet was now the judge of every word, every clip, every breath, every expression. When Copeland declared his belief that God could intervene in national affairs and guide leadership, the moment went viral, instantly weaponized by both sides. Supporters saw spiritual courage. Critics saw political overreach. Commentators saw content. Meme makers saw opportunity. But here's the part people overlook. The prayer didn't create influence. Influence created the moment. People only go viral if they're already visible. And Copeland, after decades of broadcasting, was one of the most visible religious figures alive. The internet age, friend and enemy. The rise of YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and news aggregation produced a paradox for Copeland. His message reached more people than ever before. But for the first time, context no longer controlled interpretation. Full sermons were replaced with 12-second clips. Complex teachings were reduced to out-of-context sound bites. Broadcasts were cut, chopped, edited, memed, and repackaged for shock value. This created an image of Kenneth Copeland that was largely algorithm-generated. Intense expressions, animated preaching style, short emotional moments, high-energy delivery, dramatic vocal cadence. These clips exploded because the internet rewards big emotion, big reactions, and big personalities, even if the meaning behind them is lost. The same energy that captivated millions in church services for decades now fueled millions of online views, some supportive, some mocking, some merely curious. And this created a new layer of influence. Kenneth Copeland became a cultural figure, not just a religious one. But what did Copeland do as he became a digital target? Did he respond? Did he defend? Did he retreat? The answer shocked both critics and supporters. The strategy of non-reactivity. Most public figures enter the digital battlefield. They tweet. They post statements. They defend themselves. They fight misconceptions. They debate journalists. Copeland did none of that. He did not chase the internet. He did not participate in public back and forths. He did not attack critics. He did not clap back on social media. Instead, he focused on broadcasting a teaching of events of prayer and ministry operations. Whether one agrees with his message or not, this strategic decision protected the longevity of his brand. Because here's the psychological truth. You cannot defeat a caricature. You can only outlive it. And Copeland outlived every viral wave, every meme cycle, every trending clip, every investigative segment, every commentary video. His strategy proved something powerful. If your mission is large enough, you cannot afford to fight small battles. The leadership principle that made everything possible. Throughout this era, one foundational principle shaped Copeland's longevity. Focus on what you are called to do, not what people call you. This principle resonates far beyond religion. Entrepreneurs, content creators, CEOs, athletes, artists, anyone building something meaningful eventually faces public criticism. The reason many never reach greatness. They surrender power to public perception. But Copeland's approach teaches a counterintuitive lesson. You cannot control interpretation. You can only control output. As long as your output remains consistent, your influence compounds, regardless of criticism. This is the leadership psychology that kept Copeland's ministry growing even during public storms. Viewer engagement trigger. Comment. Focus on output, not opinions. This keeps you present, psychologically and algorithmically. The globalization of a message. By the 2010s, Kenneth Copeland Ministries had translated content into multiple languages, established outreach in multiple continents, and created one of the largest Christian media footprints in the world. His teachings were being broadcast in North America, Europe, Central America, Africa, Asia, Australia, Middle Eastern countries. His conferences drew attendees from dozens of nations. International pastors trained under his teachings. New generations discovered his content through social platforms, some seeking faith, others seeking curiosity, all contributing to the reach. This was the shift from national figure to global phenomenon. And with that shift came a question that sets up the intensity of how does a movement prepare for life after its founder? And what happens when longevity becomes just as important as legacy? Chapter 6. The Legacy of Power. What Kenneth Copeland really left behind. After 6 chapters, we've dissected the empire, the wealth, the controversies, and the spiritual theater. But the real question remains, what happens now? And what will Kenneth Copeland truly be remembered for? 1. The final act of a spiritual titan. As Kenneth Copeland's ministry enters the twilight of his leadership, the conversation shifts from what he built to what he leaves behind. His empire, valued in the hundreds of millions, continues to grow, evolve, and replicate itself through a network of protégés, satellite ministries, media broadcasts, and global conferences. He is no longer the fiery young preacher racing across America in the 1960s. He is now a figure whose influence has imprinted itself on several generations of believers, critics, and aspiring televangelists. But the legacy of Kenneth Copeland is complex. It cannot be reduced to a single sentence, whether praise or condemnation. It is a legacy of faith breakthroughs, financial controversies, miracle claims, lavish living, spiritual empowerment, and public scrutiny, all tightly woven together. This chapter brings everything full circle. 2. The follower's perspective. A man who changed their lives. What keeps millions loyal? What keeps them tuning in, donating, and defending? For many believers, Kenneth Copeland represents spiritual liberation. They describe transforming moments. A prayer that healed them. A sermon that sparked a business idea. A message that convinced them their life was worth more than their past mistakes. To them, Copeland is not a televangelist. He is a mentor they never met. He taught faith as a force, prosperity as a divine promise, words as creative power, partnership with God as a financial covenant. Many insist he saved their marriages, restored their confidence, or helped them escape depression. To this group, Copeland's legacy is spiritual empowerment. But there is another group with an entirely different story. 3. The critic's view. An empire built on exploitation. Critics see Copeland as the embodiment of the prosperity gospel machine. They argue his wealth contradicts Jesus' teachings. His fundraising strategies target the emotionally vulnerable. Miracle claims lack evidence. Private jets, mansions, and a 1,500-acre ministry campus reflect corporate excess, not spiritual leadership. His infamous demon-possessed tube jet remark, broadcast worldwide, became a symbol of what critics call the disconnect between pulpit and reality. To them, Copeland's legacy is one of manipulation and spectacle. Proof of how charisma, media, and religion can intertwine to create vast financial empires. 4. The psychological legacy. The formula behind his influence. Kenneth Copeland didn't lead for decades by accident. He mastered a strategy, intentional or not, based on 3 psychological pillars. Pillar 1. Repetition. Repeating key phrases, sow your seed, faith works, the blessing is yours, creates mental anchors that shape habits and beliefs. Pillar 2. Future visioning. He paints vivid images of prosperity, healing, and breakthrough. The audience doesn't just listen, they visualize themselves inside the promise. Pillar 3. Urgency plus exclusivity. Give now. Today is your breakthrough. This moment carries a unique anointing. These tactics are persuasive, effective, and time-tested. Whether you view it as inspiration or manipulation depends entirely on your perspective. 5. Financial legacy. The ministry that functions like a corporation. Kenneth Copeland Ministries resembles a multinational enterprise more than a traditional church. Its components include television broadcasting, publishing, real estate, aviation, conferences, international hubs, merchandise, online donation funnels. This interconnected structure ensures that even if one channel slows, the others sustain the flow of revenue and influence. The ministry is designed not just to survive Kenneth Copeland, but to transcend him. His legacy includes an organizational blueprint that future televangelists already study and emulate. 6. Influence across generations. The televangelist. Copeland mentored countless preachers directly and indirectly, many of whom now dominate the current faith broadcasting landscape. His fingerprints are everywhere: megachurches influenced by prosperity theology, YouTube faith channels mimicking his cadence, conferences borrowing his seed faith language, ministries replicating his TV production style. Whether viewed as pioneering or problematic, he undeniably shaped modern Christian media. His legacy is not only what he built, but what others built because of him. 7. The controversies that will never go away. A full documentary on Copeland cannot ignore his most infamous public moments. His refusal to apologize for luxury spending, accusations of misleading medical claims, his response to COVID-19, including blowing the virus away, investigations into tax-exempt status, employee testimonies alleging pressure and financial quotas, eyebrow-raising statements about demons in commercial airplanes. These moments will forever accompany his name, shaping future discussions about religious ethics and financial transparency. His legacy is permanently dual, admired by many, challenged by many more. 8. The philosophical legacy: faith as a mechanism of empowerment or control. This is where Copeland's story becomes deeply philosophical. Some say he democratized spiritual power. He told believers, "You can speak your future into existence. You have authority. You have favor." These ideas resonate because they inspire self-direction and confidence. Others say he commercialized hope. To critics, the formula sounded like, "If you want something from God, invest in my ministry first." Here lies the core debate that will follow his legacy for decades. 9. The future. What happens after Kenneth Copeland? Even as he grows older, Copeland's organization is not slowing down. His daughter, his ministry executives, and a younger generation of charismatic leaders are positioned to continue the message. The brand will survive him. The business model will survive him. And the debate around him will certainly survive him. Future researchers, theologians, sociologists, and critics will use his ministry as a case study on religious influence, wealth accumulation in faith organizations, charismatic authority, media-driven spirituality. Kenneth Copeland will not fade quietly. He has become an archetype. 10. The final question. What is his true legacy? After 6 chapters of context, expose, analysis, and narrative, everything reduces to a single question. Was Kenneth Copeland a master of faith or a master of persuasion? Some will answer, a spiritual giant who taught millions to believe bigger. Others will insist, a charismatic entertainer who monetized spirituality. Both perspectives exist because both contain elements of truth. His legacy is not one-dimensional. It is a mosaic, brilliant to some, troubling to others. Regardless of where you stand, one fact remains undeniable. Kenneth Copeland changed the landscape of modern Christianity forever.